Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see people on this. It looks like it's going to rain this evening. For us to talk about energy and all these things that are affecting our energy prices and everything. I'm Lucy Dathan. I represent the 142nd District, which covers part of Norwalk and part of New Canaan. I'm in my third term and just loving representing you with being Vice Chair of Human Services, sitting in Appropriations, and I'm Chair of the Regs Review Committee. I'm here tonight with two of my colleagues, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump in and talk to Chairwoman Gillette. So, Senator Maher, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you very much, Lucy. I really appreciate. I am a new senator, freshman senator, and I represent Wilton, Westport, Weston, Reading, half of Ridgefield, a portion of New Canaan, Darien, and Stamford. And I'm delighted to be here. I'm honored to be your state senator, and I'm looking forward to this evening. So thank you so much for getting it all set up. And I turn it back to you.
Great. Representative Denning, your turn.
Thank you very much. I'm Keith Denning. I am a freshman representative representing all of Wilton, a good portion of New Canaan, and a little bit of Ridgefield. And I am learning quickly how government works and doesn't work. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to understand something that I've been very concerned about, which is why our energy bills are so high. And thank you, Representative Dathan.
Great. Well, we are so excited to hear from PURA, which is the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority. And we are joined this evening by Chairwoman Gillette, who has a huge amount of experience, not just here in Connecticut, since she's been the chairwoman of PURA, but before then, she has worked within the Energy Storage Association as Vice President of External Relations. She's from 2011 to 2018, she also worked within the Maryland Public Service Commission, which is an independent agency within the Maryland state governments that regulates public utilities. So she has been there, done it, and we are so lucky to be joined by with her this evening. And then we're going to hear from our Deputy Commissioner, Hank Webster from DEEP. But first, I'm going to let Chairwoman Gillette have the show. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, Representative Dathan, and good evening to everyone else. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to give a pretty abbreviated version of what we like to call the PURA 101 Roadshow this evening to make sure that we can get time to answer any questions that you might have. For anyone who's interested in a more detailed version of the presentation I'm about to give, we do have recorded versions. We're also happy to come into the communities and give the full PURA 101s in the future. But what we do during this PURA 101 show, and I'm going to give, like I said, a very brief intro this evening, is try to introduce you to PURA, what we regulate, what we don't regulate, and then address some of the hot topics of the day. PURA, in my experience, is one of the more misunderstood state agencies that we have. Although, as you heard in Representative Dathan's intro of me, every state has their own version of PURA. They're generally called public service commissions or departments of public utilities, but every state has one. And why is that? That's because, you know, a couple hundred plus years ago, when electricity really became more of a everyday occurrence, and the general consensus was this is a product that requires a monopoly. And that's because it's not economical to have multiple providers stringing up lines or even undergrounding them. So what we're talking about here are utilities that are natural monopolies, but PURA doesn't regulate every utility in the state. What we regulate are utilities that are called investor-owned utilities. So even though we're talking about what we refer to as public utilities or public service companies, they're providing public goods. However, they are privately owned. And so what PURA does is that we step in on behalf of the free market to provide the regulation of these utilities. So we're talking investor-owned utilities in the electric, gas, and water space. So think Eversource, UI, Aquarium, Connecticut Water, Yankees, CNG, SCG. These are the utilities that we regulate. So if you are served by a municipally owned or cooperatively owned water company or electric company, those are not regulated by PURA. What we are is an agency within the state executive branch, but we like to describe ourselves as a quasi-judicial agency. And I'm going to get into why that's important in just a moment. But a little bit more about us and what it means to regulate these utilities. What you might be most familiar with is the regulation of utilities when it comes to the rate structure. But that doesn't happen every day. They are long drawn out proceedings that are very involved, but they don't come around every day. So when we're not in the middle of regulating the rates of these entities, what do we do? Increasingly under my tenure, we have put more and more resources towards programs designed to modernize the grid, whether it is new tariffs for renewable energy or storage programs. We've also invested a lot of resources in updating the policies, particularly customer-facing ones of these utilities. And we spend a lot of time regulating the safety of our existing gas pipelines. So PURA, another reason that PURA is unlike other state agencies is you may have interacted with a commissioner or a secretary of an agency. PURA actually has 3 commissioners, myself and my 2 colleagues. And the reason I point that out to you is to draw out further what it means to be a quasi-judicial agency and why this is important to you and important when it comes to regulating the rates. All of our work at PURA is done through something called a docket. Now, if you are a lawyer or you're lawyer adjacent, the terminology that I'm about to use is very familiar to you. You can think of myself and my 2 colleagues as something like an appellate judge panel. So there's 3 of us. We have to make decisions based on a majority vote. And sometimes we do split in our decision making. And these decisions that we're making are legally binding on the utilities that we regulate. But we are not making the decisions out of thin air. We go through a lengthy docket process that is dictated by statutes that are passed by the legislature. And it's really important not just to engage with them, but with us to make sure that the policies and programs and laws that they're passing are dutifully and faithfully implemented by PURA. So when something's passed by the legislature and PURA is required to implement it, we go through a docket process that involves taking evidence from parties and from the public. We hold hearings, we have oral arguments, we put out draft decisions. It's a pretty lengthy process. And the reason that I'm bringing that to your attention, and I do go into this in greater detail during our full PURA 101 presentation, is I like to flag for folks the opportunity and the meaningful engagement that can happen from members of the public. So many of you are familiar with how you can provide public comments to the legislature when you're having public hearings on bills. We have similar processes at PURA. You can monitor everything that we do through our online docket process. You can sign up for email alerts. And if you're specifically interested in one of the topics that we're going through, you can actually provide public comment. And you can do that in writing, or you can show up to one of our hearings. A lot of our hearings are done virtually by Zoom. We do some hearings still in person at our offices in New Britain. But at any time that you have a comment about something that PURA is doing or under consideration, we're happy to accept comments and consider them as part of the record. Now, importantly, PURA can only make decisions based on the evidence put into the record before us. So we are really on the whole roadshow, and the impetus for events like this evening are to demonstrate to you all that the real reason that we need engagement from the public to provide us on the ground experiences about how things under consideration in our dockets might affect you. Because again, we can only make decisions based on evidence submitted into our record. Speaking of which, if you have more time and resources, you can formally intervene in our proceedings. Now, I don't want to offer this as a easy solution. It is something that is time intensive and resource intensive, But an example of it is, just a couple of years ago, we had the first selectmen and first select women from some of the towns, including Ridgefield, who came together, pooled their resources, and actually intervened in PURA's investigation into Eversource's response to Tropical Storm Isaias. And I typically highlight that decision in these PURA 101 roadshows as an example of how participation from members of the public and your elected officials can make real differences on the outcomes. So you may not remember this, but because this is a couple of years ago now, but PURA actually imposed the highest civil penalty allowed under law at the time on Eversource. It was a $28.4 million fine, not recoverable in rates, that was issued to Eversource for how they responded to that storm. And I've got excerpts on the screen here, screenshots from that. It's a couple 100-page decision, but we do summarize the evidence that came from just members of the public, as well as your elected officials, and how that contributed to PURA making the decision that we did. So now I just want to touch on a few examples of some of the most frequently asked questions that PURA gets these days, and hopefully head off a couple of questions and inspire you to ask others. Of course, we get a lot of questions, particularly on the electric bill side. And we do have YouTube, a pretty healthy YouTube channel at this point, Connecticut PURA, PURA, where we have videos that go into narrated breakdown of your electric bill for both Eversource and UI customers. But before January 1st of this year, the number one question I got at events like this was, why is my delivery charge 3 times that of my supply charge? And I say that was my number one question before January 1st of this year. I don't get that question so much anymore because supply rates did increase dramatically January 1st. But I'm going to go through this presentation nonetheless. So, on the delivery side of your bill, we actually have made a decision this time last year so that your bills will be redesigned effective this coming summer. Because I think the answer to the question about why is my delivery rate 3 times that of my supply is, it's not. It's not actually 3 times the size. What it is a misnomer, because there are several different buckets of charges that are in the delivery side of your bill. And like I said, we have a presentation and a video that goes into this in detail. And the reason that we have spent so much time trying to educate customers about the breakdown of their bill is we think it's very important that you have transparency into the cost drivers, and also more importantly, who regulates or doesn't regulate different components of your bill. Because if you thought that PURA regulated everything on your electric bill, you'd be wrong. So I'm going to explain that now. So on the delivery side, as you can see here, there are 3 different categories that make up the delivery side of your bill. There's transmission, distribution, and public policy. Now, transmission and distribution, we may think, especially if you're not familiar with the energy industry, are those not synonyms for each other? And they're not. The best way I can describe this is kind of likening it to the roadway system. So transmission are those big tall towers. You can think of them like highways. They're crossing multiple states, and instead of cars going at high speeds, it's electricity going at high voltages. That's compared to the distribution charges on your bill, which are more akin to the local roadways, how you get from your office to your house. So they're actually 2 different components of this big system about how you get electricity from point A to point B. Now, the reason this is also important to distinguish is transmission, which makes up an increasingly high component of your bill, is regulated by the federal government, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. So neither PURA nor the state of Connecticut have any control over those costs. However, we do often work with our congressional delegation to, of course, put pressure on the Congress and FERC and represent our interests there. Distribution, however, is what PURA does have control over. Distribution rates are set through rate case proceedings. You may have seen an announcement a week or so ago where we made a decision in the Aquarion distribution rate case. UI is in for a rate case right now. Eversource has not been in for a rate case since 2017. So I, during my tenure, have not had the opportunity to go through Eversource's books. Finally, the public policy programs on the bill. These are programs that are directed by legislation. So when it comes to PURA, we make sure that the utilities are faithfully implementing these programs, that they're not, imposing any extra costs. But we're doing more of an accounting and administrative oversight check. The final category, the one that was most notable January 1st, is the supply category. Now, historically, this made up more like 30% of your bill, and it's much higher right now because of the supply rate increases on January 1st. But there was, rightfully so, a lot of outcry about those rates going up January 1st. A lot of questions of PURA, what's going on? Why did you allow this? Unfortunately, about 2 decades ago, the decision was made to deregulate the supply component of your bill. So we weren't the only state that did it. About half of the country did. But the generation component, the supply component of your bill is not regulated by PURA. It is not regulated by the legislature, is not regulated by the state. What it is a competitively sourced product from the regional market. What PURA does do is make sure that the procurement of the supply is done competitively and that the utilities are not marking it up for profit. So we do make sure that is a solely pass-through cost. Now, historically, these rates change on January 1st and July 1st. And historically, they do go up January 1st and they do historically go down July 1st. That is because it is more expensive to generate electricity in New England during the first half of the year as compared to the second half of the year. And I'm happy to get more into that during Q&A. But the good news here is there is something that you can do about it. It was deregulated, but that doesn't mean that you have to get your supply from Eversource or from UI, whoever your electric provider is. Now, you would still get your bill from them. They would still be providing that service to you, delivering the electricity. But as a result of deregulating that sector, what it did was open it up to competition. So if you'd like to shop around for your third-party supplier, you can go to energizect.com. Now, please do make sure to go to that website. If you put it into your browser, there are other, advertised sites that pop up first. So you do need to make sure to go to energizect.com, which is, overseen by state agencies. And while there's a lot on here, the thing that we would draw your attention to is the supplier rate finder, which brings you to the energizect.com rate board. Now, on this website, you can compare and contrast what's called the standard service product, which is the default product that Eversource and UI provide, to competitively sourced options. Now, I was on there just yesterday, and in Eversource's territory right now, standard service is locked in at 24 cents through July 1st. However, there were some rates on the board yesterday that were like 10.5 cents. Myself and my family locked into a 13-cent rate in the fall, for example. So you may not have historically shopped around for electricity, and you wouldn't be alone. In fact, roughly 85% of Connecticut ratepayers have been on standard service for the past decade, and that's because it's historically been a more competitive product. But what we're seeing right now is that suppliers, competitive suppliers, are having more success procuring more competitive rates. So I would encourage you to go to energizect.com and look around and see what you can get. A couple of quick reminders, and then I'll wrap up here. If you do decide to shop around for electricity, I would implore you to do 2 things. Mark on your calendar for May 15th and November 15th, a reminder to yourself to go back to the rate board and check for other options. That's because the standard supply rates change on January 1st and July 1st, and they're announced 45 days ahead of time. So you can log onto that rate board and see whether the standard service rate is going to become more competitive or not. The number 2 customer protection, and this is thanks to the legislature and their passing of some legislation 2 years ago. The legislature has acted to prohibit the charging of cancellation fees. So even though some of these products say that they have 2-3-year commitments, they cannot legally charge a cancellation fee. So if at any time you find a better rate, you can change to that supplier and see no cancellation fee. So I'll leave you, and we're happy to make these slides available with all the hyperlinks embedded in them. I'll leave you on this slide for PURA's customer service. We operate a call center. We also take complaints or inquiries by email and by an online form. And while we do encourage folks to contact their utilities first to try to resolve any issues, we are ready and able to assist in communications with those companies and any other questions that you might have. So I'll stop there and thank you for having me.
That's great. Thank you, Chairwoman Gillette. That's great. We're gonna hang in for questions and get through the Deputy Commissioner Deep's presentation, and then I'd like to do questions for everybody. But thank you so much. I'm going to introduce now Deputy Commissioner Hank Webster from DEEP. And just so folks know, we use a lot of acronyms up in Hartford. So DEEP actually is the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. And Hank has been there for not too long, so it's great to have him on board. But he comes with a very strong background working at the Acadia Center. He's been a senior policy advocate in Rhode Island and comes out of DC working as a lawyer down there. And it is my pleasure to introduce you. Thank you so much, Deputy Commissioner.
Oh, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here, and really appreciated the presentation before me because it covered a lot of important ground, and so it should make mine a lot more efficient. So that's fantastic. So it is a pleasure to be here. In sum, and I'm Hank Webster. I'm the new Deputy Commissioner for the Bureau of Energy and Technology Policy. So we oversee a lot of different regulatory areas, everything from affordable housing and energy retrofits to broadband, energy supply, and decarbonization of transportation and buildings. So it's a broad scope, but these are all obviously interrelated problems, interrelated challenges, and it's one of the most interesting and exciting times in our nation's history in these fields. So thank you very much for having this forum, giving us this opportunity to connect directly with the people of Connecticut and talk about some exciting policy initiatives underway. So in sum, we're on a fossil fuel and climate change roller coaster. I think everybody on the call is well familiar with the volatility in our energy pricing from season to season, year to year. A lot of the high electricity prices are linked to high fossil fuel prices. And because our region is so dependent on fossil fuels for such large sectors of our economy, we reach these pressure points each winter. We have need for, at the moment, natural gas or fossil gas to heat buildings, to serve industrial processes, and then also to work at power generation facilities. And so in the winter, that becomes very difficult. Some power generators are able to switch over to oil, and so that also increased costs. And since fossil fuels are part of the global marketplace, states like Connecticut and the broader region are kind of subject to a lot of forces that are outside of our control, whether they're geopolitical events like we have going on right now in Ukraine, wars, as well as the just decisions to produce fossil fuels or not that are set by different not NGOs or governmental bodies, and then also obviously the economic interests associated with fossil fuel sales, looking for the highest possible price globally to sell their product. So these are all things that put us at the end of a stick, and it's one of the critical reasons, in addition to the changing climate and public health considerations, that we need to move away from fossil fuels. We need to reduce our over-reliance on them, and we need to develop more resources that are actually local to Connecticut and New England. And so we have an abundance of sunshine and wind, hydropower in the region. And so we're really looking to lean into those resources. I also wanted to share, obviously earlier this year, Governor Lamont issued the State Energy Action Plan, and DEEP is right at the core of that, working with our partners at the federal level and the legislature and the private sector, including the Energy Efficiency Board and all of our states throughout the region, to work on bringing down prices and to also make investments into people's homes to reduce their energy burdens, which is the portion of your overall wallet that goes towards energy needs. And that spans obviously all your heating costs, your electricity costs, and your automobile and driving costs. And so it's again the same fuel that's used for so much of that. So we're seeing a lot of pressures on those resources. I wanted to highlight some near-term actions that are embedded in the Energy Action Plan and also some efforts at DEEP. So one is the LIHEAP program, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. And this is a federally funded program that helps low-income households pay their heating bills. And there's a link there to be able to sign up. But it's a good program. If you haven't been able to check it out yet, there is an opportunity to really address some of that energy burden that I discussed earlier. And Operation Fuel is a local nonprofit partner that is subsidized by the state to offer middle-class families making up to $94,000 a year some financial assistance on home energy bills and heating costs. In addition, there's a customer relief plan. So this fast-track proceeds from the Millstone Power contract, which we had the foresight to keep that plant online, and that gave residents, as part of that agreement, bill credits on their electricity bills. And then also DEEP and our partners in the Lamont administration and other agencies called Eversource and UI to the table to help Connecticut ratepayers. That resulted in $10 million in Eversource shareholder expense for energy assistance to customers, and another $3 million from United Illuminating to Operation Fuel, which is that nonprofit I mentioned earlier, to provide additional direct assistance for electricity and heating costs. Additionally, we've secured approval from PURA, from the chairwoman's agency, for accelerated implementation of a discounted rate for low-income hardship customers. Regarding energy efficiency, this is one of the foundational ways that we can help control our energy bills by improving the appliances and the building shell to reduce the overall amount of energy that we need. So while the rate may be high or higher because you're using less, hopefully, ideally, the plan is for your bills to be lower. And so in 2021, we're happy to report that it generated more than $62 million in savings for Connecticut residents and businesses. And on average, it delivers about $1,000 in services to the average participant. And then after those services have been installed, they save up to $200 in annual energy bill savings. So this is, again, about making investments, upfront costs that are then recouped and then exceeded over time, because a lot of these improvements are made on a permanent basis. The insulation in your walls or in your attic, will be there to stay. And so it should help continue to bring down your energy bills. Similarly, there's the Weatherization Assistance Program that we help administer that provides insulation, air sealing, and other energy savings measures to low-income residents. And in conjunction with that, we're excited about growth in the residential energy preparation services, which is going to provide a great amount of funding to help overcome some health and safety barriers that are sometimes present that prevent those additional weatherization investments or electrification investments. And so we're expecting to serve about 600 homes by the end of 2025 to remediate things like asbestos and mold. But we want to grow that significantly. We want to be able to bring that to many, 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 many more homes. It's a lot of manys, I know, but that's how excited we are about that program. So those are some things happening right now and in the near term. Excuse me. I also wanted to take some time and talk about some long-term actions, things that are generally found in the legislature. And this working relationship between the administration and the legislature is critically important because the statutes and the statutory authority for these programs flows from the legislature. And so we're greatly appreciative of our partners there, not only to be able to host events like this and continue the conversations, but their hard work up at the State House and long hours to evaluate different proposals and to put them forward as well. So in that vein, there's legislation, in that vein, the department is using existing authority that was granted by the legislature to pursue additional offshore wind. We have a technical session on an upcoming RFP, or request for proposals process, and that technical session is actually this week on March 29th. And that process will play out over the remainder of the year, where energy developers, put together proposals, present bids to the state, and we go through a thorough analysis and determine which ones are the best deal for Connecticut ratepayers and residents. And then that contract process begins in earnest. We're also looking at opportunities related to hydropower and solar and other clean energy. So it's not just offshore wind, it's the whole kit and caboodle. We're additionally concerned and focusing on regional efforts to improve reliability. There's been some concerning events coming out of the region in the past year or two, concerns about energy adequacy or fuel adequacy in the region, and delays in connecting new renewable energy that can help offset that challenge. So we're working together very closely with our neighboring states. Commissioner Dykes is one of the leaders of that effort and is called upon by not only our fellow states, but also working very closely with the federal government. In sort of a progress report on clean energy, Connecticut has procured over 1 gigawatt, which is quite a bit, but we want to do more. And that's of solar and land-based wind and other renewables. And a lot of that is getting built, coming online. So we know that it's in the queue, but these projects unfortunately take some time to deliver. We also are very focused on electrification and energy efficiency. So again, going back to reducing the overall amount that we need. And so this is a little bit of data about our conservation and load management program, which are tied to our energy efficiency efforts. So 114 megawatts of electricity generation capacity have been avoided. We've also avoided more than almost 200,000 tons of carbon dioxide emissions. And this is all critical to meeting our state's greenhouse gas requirements to bring us down significantly over the next 30 years, or 27 now. And we continue to support critical building efficiency programs. We're very committed to, again, addressing those health and safety barriers. You probably heard quite a bit about different federal laws that are in play, and we are coordinating very closely again with our partner agencies within the state, with the other states in the region to compete for some of that funding, and then also to work with the federal government and make sure that we're understanding and prepared for all the guidelines that are associated with these funding programs. But there's quite a bit. It's a generational opportunity. You've probably heard the talking point that this is a historic level of investment that this country has never seen in climate efforts, and that's absolutely true. We're actively monitoring or pursuing over $220 million in federal funding for Connecticut, and in later stages, there's also much more in the competitive rounds. So once we are able to put together some best feet forward on the initial phases of these investments, we're going to be better suited and situated to compete for even more money to come into Connecticut, creating jobs, reducing energy costs, reducing emissions, cleaning our air. So this is really ticking a lot of critical boxes. And some of these investments and federal programs are in the form of tax preferences or credits for large developers of programs, but then a lot of them are coming straight into the home. They're being applied to electric vehicle rebates, heat pumps, solar investments, all of the above, battery storage. And so we're very excited to help Connecticut and all of its residents understand and roll these out into their own communities. These are slides that have a lot of detail on specific programs. I'm just going to roll through these, but happy to send this out after the fact so people can slow down and look at them. In closing, I wanted to also just talk about some longer term initiatives in legislation that we're pursuing. So two main things in this legislation, SB 979. One would be establishing home energy labels for renters, which the easiest way to describe that is like when you look at a vehicle that's for sale and you can read the fuel economy, you'll understand how much you can expect to spend in fuel and energy in that vehicle, and then applying that to your buildings, because you don't know generally what your energy consumption will be. And that's a huge factor in actually keeping housing and commercial buildings affordable. In addition, we're looking to expand the amount of tree canopy in communities that are vulnerable to heat as the climate warms, and we have more and more pavement. We are recognizing and seeing what is called heat island effect, urban heat island effect, where the heat comes in off the pavement and goes into the buildings, and it's just very hard to keep it cool. So having the tree canopies there will help reduce, again, the amount of energy you need to cool yourself in the summer. H5634, this is an act increasing funding for energy efficiency programs. It's fairly self-explanatory, so I'll pass by that again. SB4 is an act concerning Connecticut's present and future housing needs. So again, this is an effort where DEEP is coordinating with the Department of Housing to establish a retrofit program for multifamily residences. And again, this is a variation on a theme where we're trying to reduce the overall amount of energy burden and improve health and safety. So that's the end of my presentation. I appreciate the indulgence. I'm sure I went over, but this is all very exciting and thorough stuff. And so I'm excited to hear any questions and provide responses.
Thank you so much, Mr. Webster. Very thorough. I would love to post everybody's presentation tomorrow. So if you could share it with me later, and also agency contacts. I think I shared quite a few times the PURA 101 video that you all have done to talk about how you understand the bill. I will share that again because I think that's really good. And Deputy Commissioner and all, will be great to see some of those details. One of the other bills that we are working on is SB 7, which is really a consumer protection bill that really outlines what utility companies can and cannot pass on to their ratepayers regarding their business operations. So I am looking forward to continuing the dialogue on that. I know Senator Margie, you want to give a quick highlight on that, or you know, I've got some bullet points. If you're, I know I don't think you serve my energy, so, and I'm putting you in a hot seat.
I do serve on energy and technology, but I do not have the bullet points in front of me. So if you do, that would be awesome.
Yeah, it's really a consumer protection bill, and it really changes what from a mandatory requirement to an optional requirement, so that you're decoupling the distribution revenues from the volume of natural gas and electricity sales. And there's another several sections that really are consumer protection, how deal with PURA, and how settlements are charged, and how rate increases are done. So the dialogue is carrying on with that, because I believe that one has been JF'd out of the committee, which means it is on to the next stage of the legislative process. So that one's also very exciting. And I do hope we've done some great things over the last few years when it comes to energy and energy efficiency. I put in a bill this year for solar canopies, which I'm hoping is going to be taken part of one of these other initiative bills coming out of the Energy and Technology Committee, but we're still kind of working through all of that. I think the Deputy Commissioner talked a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act. I was really happy to hear about that, and I will let folks read a little bit more. And I did want to say there was one question that I have received a couple times from constituent, and I think Chairwoman Gillette, you did a great job answering that in in your presentation about people who've had difficulty changing providers of electricity. You know, there is the complaint process, and it is very good at the PURA website and how you can go through and do, you can form that complaint. If you do have questions, you all are also welcome to reach out to your representative, either Senator Maher or Representative Denning or myself. We do have some questions, unless my co-host would like to say a few words before we jump into questions. All right, great. Well, the first question comes Ridgefield, and it is, what needs to be done to speed up the shared clean energy facility program? Minnesota's community energy program has over 850 megawatts of power production in operation. The CT program only has 2 megawatts. How do we catch up and surpass Minnesota to help low and moderate income families with energy costs? Who would like to answer that one? Chairwoman Gillette, you're on the edge of your seat, I can tell. Thank you.
So speaking of SB 7, which I'm so happy plugged, I'm really excited about that bill. There was a PURA bill that that the Energy and Technology Committee raised this session. It was, I want to say it was SB 977, which I hope to be taken up through SB 7 this session. That was PURA's take on some of the improvements, more of the technical modifications to some of these programs that they're implemented by the utilities, so Eversource and UI. In the same way that you know, some of the energy efficiency programs that Deputy Commissioner Webster was alluding to, we do use these utilities as vehicles to administer their programs, but they're overseen in this case by PURA. So the SCEF program, you know, we're what, going into year 3 of a wholly new design program. So the legislation that I referenced has some attempts to, you know, align the definitions of low-income customers appropriately. It seeks to remove some of the, you know, more arbitrary constraints in the case of virtual net metering successor program that currently requires municipalities to own the land rather than, you know, have some kind of long-term lease arrangement. So we've picked up a few things over the past couple of years of implementing this program that we think are some procedural barriers to it that I think some of the legislation this session, if it's you know, gets to the floor, would assist with. Also, the good news coming out of last session was that the legislature acted to raise the cap on SCEF on the Shared Clean Energy Facility program. So I think you know, we're in the period right now where the auctions are underway, and I'd love to see the results of that, and then you know, come back next legislative session and be able to advise more fully on if there are additional changes that need to be made. But I will offer to put into the chat. PURA has launched it. We launched it last year, and so we just issued our second iteration of it. It's a clean and renewable energy annual report that presents data on not just SCEF, but all of the renewable energy programs of the state. And I think this gets at a question that's later asking where we are in the process. So I'll be happy to drop a link to that report into the chat, and it has information on SCEF as well as all of the renewable programs of the state has.
That's super helpful. I appreciate you doing that. The next question is about Energize CT. And for folks who are not too familiar about Energize CT, it is a fantastic program. Deputy Commissioner put that as part of his presentation as well as Chairwoman Gillette. You can actually, there is real-time savings that comes out of that through the construction and load program that folks can get at their house. It takes a few weeks to sign up for someone to come to your house, but it is fantastic. I know we had noticeable savings when we did it several years ago. This question is regarding the Energize CT rate board. So this is for suppliers. One can sort suppliers by risks, what are RESTs and why are they important to the consumer? This might be to
Sure. Sure. So REC is a renewable energy credit, and it's essentially, you're trying to monetize the environmental attributes associated with a megawatt hour of renewable energy. So it's a way to incentivize, the production of renewable energy moving forward. The goal generally is to incentivize new renewable energy to come online. That can be to incentivize the retention of existing. So the state has a renewable portfolio standard, which requires that the utilities, whether they're providing default service or the suppliers, whoever is serving you in terms of your supply, it requires that those suppliers have RECs, renewable energy credits, to equate to a certain percentage of the generation that they're supplying to you. So the state has a minimum RPS and it escalates, over time. But if you as a customer want to purchase RECs above and beyond what's mandated in the state, and the Deputy Commissioner may know the exact percentage, I don't off the top of my head that's applicable this year, but we're going up towards 40%. If you as a consumer want to purchase 100% REC product for something that's above and beyond, you can go to the rate board and sort not just by price, but you can also sort for all renewable options. Because you may be okay paying a little bit more if you know that your electricity matches up to renewable energy credits above and beyond what the state requires.
Getting up to the total of 35% in 23, and then up to 48% by 2030. So you were right, unsurprisingly.
That's great. One question that came up here from one of my constituents is why isn't Eversource mandated to advertise Energize CT website in large print on every bill and disclose that customers can often save money by switching away from Eversource as a supplier? Is there any sort of mandate on that? I mean,
no, there's not currently, but it's something that's come up this session. We do not want to minimize the impact to customers of the supply rate increases that happened on January 1st. I think those rates were unprecedented. Certainly we haven't seen anything like that over the past decade. But that being said, the reality of the situation is that standard service has been more competitive than third-party suppliers since the market was deregulated. And so there hasn't been as much emphasis on, making sure that folks are aware of their options because standard service was more competitive. But what we had to do over the past couple of months was rapidly scale up our education efforts because you are seeing the third-party suppliers offer more competitive rates. So while there's not currently a requirement that Eversource or UI advertise the rights of customers to enroll with a third-party supplier, I think that's something that was under consideration with the legislature. There's another piece of legislation, HB 6724, that touches on this a little bit. And PURA itself has put together a tutorial on how to enroll with a third-party supplier, which I'm also happy to put into the chat.
that would be great. Because I will definitely share that. I have shared that earlier on in the session on social media, but sometimes it's helpful for these things to be reshared. I know I didn't get my act together to actually try to change until January, and I'm glad I did. So I think it makes it easy. I think my constituent Nick's question was answered for the most part, but one of the things I'd like to maybe the Deputy Commissioner to discuss is what do you think our local municipalities like Norwalk can do to help achieve these goals? It feels like we're moving ever so slowly. So any sort of comments on that would be great.
Yeah, thank you. It's a big concern. We all want to move quickly and responsibly towards these goals. As far as the underlying question of how are we doing, you know, we're making progress, but I think not only in the electric grid consideration, but also just economy wide, looking at emissions, it's clear we need to do more. And also the last few years of pandemic era data are, hard to analyze and fit into what the trend lines are, because emissions in several sectors went down because of the artificial and long lasting changes to the economy. We've started to see a lot of that creep back up as, vehicle miles traveled increased. So that's been cutting away at any gains that we had in the transportation sector from remote and telework. And similarly, as businesses get back going, commercial industrial sector emissions are increasing. So it's hard to answer where we are right this moment, but we know we need to do more. We need to do more to get to the targets that are called upon by the IPCC report. As far as what municipalities can do, I think that continuing education with residents is a key thing. So as has been kind of discussed here, you can't necessarily rely on one or even multiple sources. We really need everybody talking about how to save money, how to reduce energy bills, how to increase our share of renewables. Municipalities could look at aggregating policies that could aggregate electric load, and then sometimes they can go out and procure electricity at lower rates. So that could be an effort that expands it, because if you have, it's like anything else, if you could buy something in bulk on behalf of your residents or your constituents, you can generally find a better deal, savings somewhere. And so that could be another great way. And then obviously, as it pertains to municipal budgets, really looking throughout all of the assets of a municipality and finding the investments that will lower energy bills in the long run, and recognizing that there might be a higher upfront cost for some of these investments, but recognizing also that in tax year 3 or 4, you might start to see some of those benefits come back down, and hopefully even more so in the out years. So those are some ideas that I would share.
Yeah, I know some states like New York and California have taken very aggressive sort of approach doing for construction and retrofitting of not just multi-story high rises, but also for single family homes, multifamily homes. This is something that we could do in Connecticut, but a lot of people do also have the concerns that it really drastically raises construction costs. But that's something that we could think about, and I know it's something that we've talked a lot about in different legislatures over the past several years. I've got another question from Angela here. Does DEEP have the personnel it needs to manage and implement the programs that can and are possible through taking full advantage of the resources, money available to CT through the Inflation Reduction Act? I know this is a really important question and can't wait to hear your answer.
Yes, and we need more help. So we have a number of job opportunities, career opportunities at DEEP, but everybody that is currently on staff is working really hard, and we're not letting any opportunities slip through the cracks. So it's kind of a yes and answer. I think that Connecticut residents can rest assured that we're not missing out on opportunities, and we're at the forefront of efforts to make sure that our federal delegation and all of our other partners are aware of the opportunities, and making sure that we're all working off the same songbook. And I think we are leading a contingent of states that are sending a delegation down to Washington, D.C. this week, and there's some events going on, and we're also taking the opportunity to meet with our federal partners and make sure that all systems are go.
That's great. We do have one more question, and then I do want to leave a few minutes for my fellow representatives and senator to have a few more words. one more question here is there going to be continued funding for the home energy assessments? These are critical to help consumers lower energy usage and unlock rebates and incentives on things like insulation. Whoever would like to jump in on that. I know it's something that we have subsidized as part of our budget before.
Yes, that is certainly the intent.
Okay.
I don't have a crystal ball on, any legislative or regulatory changes that could come, years out, but certainly, that is the intent, because that is the opener into looking at what your energy needs are and how much they could be lower, and also looking at opportunities to upgrade and modernize things like appliances and lighting. And so that's a critical first step, and we would imagine it would continue.
Great, thank you so much. We do have another question, but I'm gonna, if we have time, I'm going to first let Senator Maher jump in.
Oh, thank you.
To jump in with a few more things.
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back to SB 7, because I think it's important to mention about one of the pieces of the legislation is to look at lobbying and legislative costs, sponsorships, membership dues, charitable contributions, advertising and marketing costs of Eversource or any of the other energy producers, in order to make sure that that isn't being passed on to the consumer, that those are the cost of business, that the cost of business is not being made, that the homeowner is not paying for that. And additionally, it also looks at incentive packages for executive compensation. And I think that people would like to hear that, because that's one of the concerns that we've read in the papers about the high cost of compensation and the amount of money being made. And this legislation actually does look at that too: executive compensation, incentive packages, and performance targets. And I know that Commissioner Gillette, you had been talking a lot about that, the targets on performance and how we were going to address that going forward. So I wanted to bring that up, but if we wanted to go back to the questions, we can certainly do that too. Did you want to mention?
Glad that you brought that up. I had a lengthy discussion with the Energy and Technology Committee this session, and I'm really looking forward to the legislature taking up SB 7. I think, what folks typically do not understand is how much of a utilities business is subsidized by ratepayers. Whether we're talking about energy efficiency programs, which are fully, paid for by ratepayers, or we're talking about utilities, paying taxes, for example. All of these costs that the utilities, are incurring are passed through to ratepayers, and that is, absent any showing that those costs are, to the benefit of ratepayers, for example. So in the course of a rate case, which we talked a little bit about during my presentation, the distribution rate proceeding, where PURA is looking at the books of these utilities and determining what they can charge for their distribution rates, that is PURA's opportunity to exercise the tools that the legislature is giving us, whether it's through the Take Back Our Grid Act from a couple of years ago, or SB 7, which I hope is passed this session. It would give us guidance and remove legal ambiguity about whether PURA has the authority to deny the utilities cost recovery for lobbying. Currently utilities get to recover the cost of putting on a rate case. So there are a lot of costs that folks do not understand the utilities are recovering from you, that I think SB 7 would work towards eliminating, and I think it really would start empowering PURA to be a regulator. So for anyone interested in learning more, happy to talk more about it. But SB 7, I couldn't recommend it enough to be passed this session.
So, Commissioner, if I could just ask a question. You said the last time you did a rate case, the last time a rate case was done on Eversource was 2017. That's 6 years ago. Do you anticipate a rate case coming up anytime in the near future?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's something I think people at this point are probably tired of hearing me talk about. But rate cases are supposed to happen every 4 years by law. Eversource has gotten out of that as a result of the settlement from 2 years ago. And there was a lot of really great things in that settlement. So I don't want to take away from it. But one of the things that caused me concern was this provision that allowed Eversource to stay out. And most people hear that and they say, okay, well, that's great. I don't want Eversource to come in and ask for more money. I'd like them to stay out. But one of the things that I've said, and I think I've now demonstrated, because we issued the decision a week ago in Aquarian, demonstrated, I think, what a regulator can do when they're exercising those tools. Because that Aquarian came in asking for 30% increase, and we actually ordered a rate decrease as a result of going under the hood and looking at what they were spending. And some of those disallowances were for things like lobbying, trade association dues. So we're really looking forward to Eversource coming in, and the soonest I can require them to come in is the fall of 2025, which is a real shame, because that means all of the tools from the Take Back Our Grid Act and from SB 7, if we pass it, including on executive compensation, we'll have to wait for that rate case. But I'm committed to sticking it out if the governor and legislature will have me, and we'll, I'll see them in the courtroom. So
that's great. That's great. I know we're getting close to overtime. I know we did talk about executive compensation in the Take Back Our Grid Act, but this in SB 7 just takes it one step further. So just to make sure that folks can understand this. Representative Denning, do you have any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share?
Oh, I wish I did, but no, I appreciate all the work you do, both of you. I'm glad to see that there's a reinvestment in our wind, our solar. I'd like to see that expand our renewable grid as quickly as we can. I know you did touch on it per se, but the hydropower coming from Quebec. And do you see any other energy sources in the next 5 years that are help decrease our rate and our dependence on fossil fuels?
Yes, nothing. I don't know that there will be any new technologies that are new to the group, but hopefully, ideally, we are implementing more of the existing technologies, getting the offshore wind interconnected and flowing into the grid, expanding on solar, rooftop and grid scale, hydropower, as you mentioned, battery storage, which helps balance the load during times where it's not being produced but is still needed. That can also help reduce the amount of fossil fuel generation, particularly around the peak hours. I think it's always interesting, and many people might not know, but the entire grid is built really to accommodate energy at just a few key hours throughout the year, usually the hottest days of the year, right? And there's a lot of resources that are not really called into action for most of that year. But then on that hot day, because we don't have as much either energy storage in the form of batteries or something else, or we don't have enough renewables on hand to be able to offset it, then we're calling in some of the dirtiest polluting facilities throughout the region. So there's a lot of little things we can do to help curb that. There's a question, I think, in the chat about demand response. That's one of the tools. There are things that we can invest in on the transmission lines that don't get as much headlines, but that can actually optimize the amount of power that we can put through existing transmission lines. So these are all there's no one size fits all. It's going to be a big mix of everything. It's going to be a big hearty soup.
And I think that's the key, is that we don't have our energy dependence from any one major source. If we can diversify, I think that's going to be best for Connecticut residents. Well, with that, it's been amazing to have both of our deputy commissioner, our chairwoman here tonight talking about these things. They are going to share with all of us all the wealth of information that they've talked about, and we will be able to share with our constituents, both within our social media as well as in our sort of e-blast, how these things you can look into more. And we will keep you in the loop of what happens with SB 7 and 6724, because I think all of these initiatives are extremely important for us to have a cleaner, more efficient Connecticut, and hopefully a lot more inexpensive. So thank you again for your time this evening, and look forward to seeing you at the Capitol over the coming months.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Have
you.
a good evening.
You too.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Bye-bye.